Oh, Richard, I want to thank you for sending out your PDF of your presentation. Um, I've, obviously I could see the Sharks elements in there, reference to Tom and reference to FIO. And, um, I'd like to think we're keeping up to date. I did get an email from Daryl Belfry, and he questioned, are we evolving the game? And so I sent a reply to him. Because what he does, I believe Richard and Tom could attest to this. Uh, Today's NHL coaches and pro coaches and college coaches, I think they get this. And so when you're doing your presentations, who have you written that for? What's your target audience?
Minor hockey coaches.
Just minor hockey. That's what I thought. So
I mean, the content, let alone the approach, would change if I were dealing with junior hockey coaches. I'd love to do that because I've spent a lot of time in junior, but their needs are entirely different. They inherit players with a certain skill base and knowledge that uh, is developed only to a certain point. They want them to fit into the culture, I guess you could say, the playing culture and the style that they want for a particular team. They only have 1, 2, or 3 years to do it. Um, and they're older, they're 17, 20 years old, 21 in some cases, in some leagues. So the approach is very different, but the constraints, and I use the constraints differently than the constraints led approach. The constraints in junior are very different, or rather are somewhat similar to minor hockey. The vast majority of teams have 2 practices a week. Some may have 3. So what are they doing in those practices to make their teams better? You know, but right now it's geared for minor hockey coaches.
okay, and I'm pretty sure the answer would be the same. When I watch minor hockey practices, and this would be at a AAA Bantam and midget level, I see coaches copying drills and not accomplishing the purpose of the drill because there's elements in it that require breaking it down and repeating smaller parts to get better at it. Um, so when you did this presentation recently and may do it again with a group of coaches, is it in Oshawa?
Yeah, yeah.
And I noticed you had people with 1 to 3 years experience and some with 15 or more years experience.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things on this topic. I just, to me, there's an absolute need at every level of minor hockey, but some associations, they don't think of their AA and triple programs as minor hockey. So they don't see the value of that. Everybody sort of mimics or copies uh, the older players and what they do on TV, and everybody's a drill hunter, a drill collector.
Yeah.
So when you did the presentation and I saw the evaluation by them, those are pretty impressive scores because I know in minor hockey they send out a girls hockey Calgary sent out a parent evaluation, and there's you can tell who the disgruntled parent is, but there's really nothing to be gained from that kind of feedback. But yours, I thought, boy, you got through to them. And I wonder if you could talk a bit about the audience you're presenting to, and how you had to adapt to it, and what you couldn't do that you might have liked to do that would have been suitable. Because one of these things is time, reading your group. every coaching clinic we do here, it's not just one group of coaches coaching the same team at the same level. So, can you talk a bit to that relative to your topic?
Sure. There's a lot to unpack there because, those of us who have done presentations and coaching clinics, since Howie Moran's first started skating, um, if you're talking about a certification clinic, you're presented with a curriculum and the PowerPoint slides. Then we have to go through the slides and show the videos all within a very tight time constraint. And initially, we who were, I've been doing this with Hockey Canada for, pretty much 40 years. We were instructors. Then they changed the name to facilitators. And in my view, a facilitator is somebody who goes into a group, like talking in this group here with the Sharks. Any discussion we have, we are facilitating conversation because we all come from a very extensive coaching background at various levels. Whereas if you go into a coaching clinic at the base level, coach 1 or coach 2, where you have coaches with 2 years experience, 4 years experience, 0 experience, we're really instructing. So with this group in Oshawa, I knew about a third of the coaches because I'd worked in that organization a few years ago. So one of the problems was we didn't get the word out until a week before. And the guy who was in charge, Tony, he was on the phone and texting people the night before, don't forget to come tomorrow night, blah, 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 blah. Well, as I indicated to you, Wally, the April 18th date fell right in the middle of postseason and tryouts. And between the two of them, coaches go out, they have the spring tryouts out here. Coaches go out and have pre-tryout skates. They've already watched the kids for 7 months, but now they have pre-tryout skates, which are unofficial tryouts. And then a week after my presentation, they went into tryouts. So their heads were in a different space, and there were a lot of coaches. I bumped into two of them as I was walking into the rink that night to do the presentation. Said, we can't come tonight, Richard, because I have a tryout skate or something, or a pre-tryout skate. So there probably would have been more. But I knew the audience, minor hockey audiences are, certainly in this country, pretty much the same. You've got everything from soup to nuts, which is not to say the coaches are nuts, but in terms of experience, in terms of the levels of play. So knowing full well what the audience was going to be, I had to generalize the topic and then say to the guys who run Oshawa minor hockey, I strongly suggest a follow-up, and let's see who would like a follow-up where I can sit down with them and have a more of a workshop environment. There may be only 10, I don't know, I have no idea. We're going to do this in August. The coaches who want to have a follow-up, and as you saw in the evaluation, Wally, the vast majority did, and how to apply some of the ideas here. And as one coach even asked me, do you expect every single thing we do on the ice to have all 6 of those elements? And I answered a question with a question as a teacher. I went, do you? Aren't you doing some of this already? Which they are. And they nodded. Yes, we are doing some of this already. So all I said to them was, you're probably applying certain things already that you don't know are proper, but they're kind of a little bit like throwing the spaghetti against the wall. Remember that scene in The Odd Couple with Walter Matthau and Jack Lemmon? He threw the spaghetti against the wall, and Walter Matthau said it's spaghetti, and Jack Lemmon laughed and said, no, it's linguine. Anyway, I digress. So I'm throwing a lot of stuff out there at them and asking them to try to absorb it. Hence, I gave them that handout as well, Wally, that I sent you. Feel free to share that with everybody else as well. That had a lot of the terminology on it and the resources and attributions and whatnot. So I had a pretty good handle on the audience I was going to be addressing. How much of a buy-in there is not really my call. It's a hope, but hope isn't the plan. So what I'm trying to do is get coaches to give some thought. I mean, they're going into their tryouts in a week, so they're all caught up in the tryout lingo and the stress of dealing with parents and whatnot. But hoping that coaches leave there asking themselves some questions about their approaches, as I've done over the years. Never, ever in all my years coaching, I don't know how many teams I've coached, 40, 45, I don't know. Did I ever take pylons on the ice and say, go around pylons and let's practice stick handling? I never did it. And I've seen, higher level coaches, they don't do it either. Time is tight. Resources are limited. So what can we do to make our practices better? And that was what I started with. And one of the suggestions I had I met with 3 people, including the president of Oshawa Minor, the development guy, Tony, and one of his assistant coaches back in March. I guess it was just after I was on the call with you guys. And this fellow said to me, Richard, I really like the content, but I think you need to approach it from their side first. In other words, don't come right out with all the research mumbo jumbo. Maybe think about starting with presenting what they already know, what they feel comfortable with, which was a really good suggestion. And I did. So I started with them sharing their favorite small area game, which they were notified in an email I would ask them to do, sharing their favorite small area game with the person next to them and describe what you're doing and why. That's the way we started the session. Not because the session was about small area games, it's not, but it's about looking at what you've been doing and asking yourself, have I been doing that the right way? Was there some kind of an intention behind what I was doing? Intentionality, it's called. Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this game? Is it just to give them 10 minutes of fun time at the end, which is fine, has its place. So,
Richard, I thought of this morning relative to the group we're talking to here. And I'm curious, even asking our group, Peter Whitney, what's your favorite small area game?
And why?
Yeah.
So my
Tom,
favorite
Rick,
small
next.
area game, I mean, I got a million of them, really, but I think one of my top 3 is the Gretzky game, where the player is below the goal line. That's the Gretzky. Each team gets a Gretzky, middle of the net. A can go from middle of the net over. B can go middle of it over, and it's a 2-on-2. And I like that because Gretzky has. I put in, or at least the way I play it. I don't know, it's a rule. The way I play it is 1,001, 1,002. You got to move the puck. If you don't move the puck, you have to push it over to the other Gretzky. So it forces you to think very quickly. It teaches players to get into areas where they can accept a pass, even if it's just a little short pass. He can give him a little short pass, get the guy on his backside, get it, and then they play 2-on-2. If there is anything there, they give it back to Gretzky, move again, get it back, quick shots. So it incorporates players thinking, working together, and setting the time limit on it gives it some sense of urgency to where there should always be someone moving and open to get that puck too. So that's one of my top 3.
Tom, have you got one that's your favorite?
Same thing. Depends what you're trying to accomplish. I think one I really like is, I call it the Art Crizel game, because he's the guy that showed it to me. And I think we probably all use it. Each team is a 3-on-3 in the zone. The coach fires the puck in. They go battle for it. And the team that gets it can score. If the puck turns over, you have to pass to your own defenseman. And then your team's on offense, so everybody's got to go from offense to defense. And then you can have different rules. You can have rules like the point man has to shoot if you want to work on, going to the net, screening, boxing out, etc. You know, rules like the same thing, a 2-second game, or goals have to originate behind the goal line. So yeah, it's a game I use every season. So it's one of my favorites.
Richard, I wonder if you could comment, because as I read your PDF of your presentation, you use the terms constraints. Could you like talk a bit how to get coaches to take the drill they're using or the game they're using and tweak it to suit their needs? Does that just happen naturally, or does it take a long time to get to that point? Or
Well, Peter and Tom just gave you examples of constraints. Whether you put a time limit or a space limit or a number of players limit on the activity you're doing, and I'm a little hesitant to call them games all the time. Coaches like to use the word drill. I don't care what you call it. A friend of mine calls them learning opportunities. Fine. But if you have your Gretzky game with a guy behind the net and he has, let's say, 2 seconds, 1,000, 2,000, you have to do something. All right. Coaches are already doing all these things, or most of them anyway. And they all have a favorite array. I mean, if you go on Tom's site, there's hundreds of different examples of games. It's almost overwhelming. In fact, one guy told me it's overwhelming. I don't know where to start. I said, well, to start with what you want, what you feel you need, and then take it from there. You can't start pouring through 500 games and I'm going to look for one that looks like fun. But the minor hockey coaches are already doing a lot of these things because they are buying into the idea that small area games work, but they don't necessarily know why. And they don't know why you need to change the constraints or change the approach, if you wish, to suit your objectives, because they don't really have an objective for the game. So I saw coaches in one of the organizations I worked with out here, where coaches would leave the game to the last 5 minutes or 6 minutes. When I'd ask their coach afterwards, well, we just ran out of time. I said, I understand time management is, it's tricky if you're not used to doing it. Like we teachers, we lived with bells and, the ding dong, time to change classes. So time management in practice is really hard, but they would leave it to the last 5 minutes. Well, I got the game in. You wanted a game at the end of the practice. So I said, I didn't say I wanted a game at the end of the practice. I said, I think you should have games of some sort in practice. And then they would throw in the constraints just like Peter and Tom were providing. But what they lost sight of, and I'm not saying Peter and Tom lost sight of it, I'm just saying what coaches generally lose sight of is, what was the purpose behind it? And does it work? Is it game-like? So they'll use what we call jokers. Tom, you've used that in your, in a lot of your games, or rovers, if you wish. They'll have a rover standing at the blue line and, going across the end zone. And they'll say, you can pass to the rover and you get it back to you, or pass to a different rover and get it. And I said, okay, great. That's cool. And what's the next step? What's the purpose behind that? Do you see that happening in your games where there's a player standing still at the blue line that you are going to pass to? Well, that's not happening in your game, but what's the big idea? So when I did the presentation, and when I started with the game, as I said, what's your favorite game, and describe it, and never mind describing the actual game, but describe why you're using it. Then I gave them a couple of games, as you saw in the PDF, Wally. I gave them a couple of examples. What is the purpose behind those games? These were invented by a couple of coaches in an association, or stolen or adapted. What's the purpose behind those? And then the next question I asked was, I asked a lot of questions. Tell me what the 4 rules of hockey are. And I think one hand went up. One, maybe one. And I remember it pausing and waiting a few seconds. I'm not talking about the principles of the game like Hockey Canada, pressure, contain, support, puck control, all those things which are really important. What are the 4 rules? And if you know what the 4 rules are, how do they play into the game activity, learning opportunity that you're providing them? Peter, I see you have your hand up.
Peter,
That's better. Yes. Um, yeah, I agree with you. The point you were making earlier about, Richard, about the communication piece, because the why of hockey used to be, I'm the coach, I said so. That's why. That used to be the why of hockey. Players have evolved over the years where back in the day, run through a brick wall for me. Got it, coach, I'll do it. Now it's, well, how come? So the important part of any coach, right, and I'm sure this is what you teach and espouse, is you have to let your players know the reason that they're doing whatever they're doing. Like when I was explaining the drills to you, that Gretzky game, when I was playing that Gretzky game, which actually I call those sacks, which are small area competitions, because years ago when we started doing this, me and an assistant coach in prep school, the head coach hated the idea of small games because he said it sounds like it's too much fun. So we said, okay, well, we came up with, how about small area competitions? He said, well, I can live with that. So we called them stack drills instead of small area games. But if the players know the reasoning, time and space, you're getting into body position, they know the reasons why, they're much more likely to want to do it at any level and then improve because they know why they're doing what they're doing. And I think that's potentially one thing that's missing. And maybe you found that because you worked deeper with the youth hockey coaches than I have in recent years. That that's a piece that there seem to be lacking is the why of it. Just because they don't think about that, they know the why of it, so it's almost as if they assume that the players will know the why of it too, instead of getting that deeper explanation.
Peter,